Okay, it's my rite of passage. Time for a Temple of the False God video. A few days ago, there was a post by Rachel Weeks of the Command Zone. Everybody should follow her, by the way. She's a great content creator. She commented on how the temples were being combined with bounce lands in the pre-con decks and how that was wrong. And there's a whole thread about it on Twitter, and I figured I'd bring this back up. There's a lot of videos that have been done on this in the past. Pleasant Kenobi did a video on it. This is a different video. Tomer from MTG Goldfish did a video on it. Tons of videos have happened for Temple of the False God. There's actually a very helpful math article by Frank Karsten that he helped out with on the Goldfish. I don't know if this was on Channel Fireball or on the MTG Goldfish, just like a mini article, but they figured out the number of lands you want to play with Temple of the False God. And long story short, you want about 40 lands, 42 lands, and a Temple of the False God to make sure that you're sitting at roughly 85 to 90% chance of getting it on time. And so Temple of the False God, it's a land, and it taps to make 2 colorless mana activate only if you control 5 or more lands. This is actually a very elegantly designed card that Pleasant Kenobi mentioned in his video. And the idea of Temple of the False God is like you want to play it in decks like Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, in which you care about spells with mana value 6 or greater. And so if we look at the Temple of the False God EDH Rec page, all of its top commanders are expensive commanders, colorless, Eldrazi, green, X spells like with Zephi, Thunder Conductor, Karn, we have 10th Doctor, Krufix, just stuff that big mana. That's what you want Temple of the False God. Dinosaurs, Maelstrom Wanderer, etc., etc. So people have been playing this wrong, partly because Wizards puts it into their decks. And I think, let's see, 52... I don't know the exact number, but roughly they had it in about half of all commander decks up till about 2021-ish. I don't know the number they're having it at now. I haven't looked that up, but it's pretty close to that. And Temple of the False God, as you can see, is played in 10% of EDH Rec registered decks. So 387,000 decks. This might seem like a high number because it's a colorless land. It could go in any deck. 10% of all decks seems like a high number. However, I would argue that this is just a page of new high-cost commanders. I would argue that since there are 32 color combinations, so you have the monocolor, you have dual color, tricolor, 4-color, 5-color, colorless, and 5-color. And so you have 6 combinations that have 1 or fewer colors. Temple of the False God sitting in 10% is not it's not that outrageous in my opinion, because you're not going to play this in let's just go to EDH Rec here. So you're not going to play it in the top commanders all time. So you're not going to play it in Atraxa, or probably not Ur-Dragon, maybe Miram because it's only 3 color, but you're not going to play it in Yuriko, Ishin, probably not. Anything with a low to the ground deck type or mana curve, you're not going to play it. So it's limited in its usefulness in a lot of decks. If we scroll down, like, Joda, the Unifier, this has a lot of colored pips in its cost, and also in the Legends. It wants to play low-cost Legends, so you're not going to play Temple in that deck. And so, like, Wizards putting it into their precons is a little bit deceiving to newer players. And there's a great article on EDH Rec by Trent Trombley, and this is the Reconstruct History. And this person goes over, the various timelines of Temple of the False God, how it's declining in number of players playing it, how it compares to Ancient Tomb. Obviously, Ancient Tomb is a better card. It's a better card other than the price tag. The price tag is like $100 right now, give or take. Temple of the False God is 15 cents. So, yeah, I mean, I'll take the 15-cent card. I'll save $100. I'll spend that on something else. But Ancient Tomb is an interesting comparison, and there's a whole bunch of other soul lands, as we say, like Soul Ring, lands that produce 2 or more mana. So you got Guildless Commons, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, Eldrazi Temple, City of Traders, Arid Archway. And so, like, these cards compare interestingly to Temple of the False God, because most of them can create the double pips early in the game, with some exceptions. The bounce lands, obviously, you probably don't want to play Temple with a bounce land like Guildless Commons, because they go against each other. You got to return a land to get the commons in play. Temple needs 5 lands, so maybe not the best unless you're in colorless Eldrazi. Maybe that works if you're playing like 42 lands. But the idea of Temple of the False God, Carson found out, like, you want to run a bunch of ramp, 42 lands I mentioned earlier, and green decks, especially with cards like Rampant Growth, are going to utilize Temple the best, which is funny because green doesn't really need it that much, but it is the best at activating the Temple. So if you have early ramp like Rampant Growth, then you're sitting pretty. And if we look back at... Oh, I just had it pulled up here. If we look back at this article on EDH Rec, they describe like other cards that can help the Temple. So if you have a deck, maybe you're kind of in the middle, you're not quite sure. Your mana curve is like relatively high, like not too high, but not too low. And so you're like, should I play it? Well, if you're playing Chromatic Lantern, Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, Dryad of Elysian Grove, Yavimaya, or cards like that, then these cards activate your Temple. These cards can let your Temple have the ability to tap for mana early in the game. It's the same idea as with Maze of Ith. Maze of Ith doesn't make mana, but you can use these cards to make mana. And so, especially colored pips. Temple of the False God, I think it's played in the right amount of decks. I mentioned that earlier. I think this is correctly evaluated by the vast majority of players. Wizards is tricking us a little bit with putting it in their precons that don't really need it, but you'll know if you want it. Emoti wants it. High cost commanders like Itali want it. Zeotorum might, 3-color maybe not. Galta might want it, maybe. Commanders with green, high cost, colorless, you'll want the Temple. There's a funny post here by Strata Games. Everyone's talking about how Temple of the False God is, how bad it is, but it's just better than Ancient Tomb. Why would I take damage for my mana? 5 lands isn't even that hard to get when I'm running 37. And like this, everybody knows this is a joke because like it's not, you just got to want it more, right? You just got to want it, right? You got to want to be lucky, and hit the Temple. So I'm just going to kind of leave it on that. The people don't like playing Temple of the False God because of loss aversion. They're much more scared of having a Temple in the early turns at less than 5 mana than they are at, just plopping it down right on time, ramping to 6+ mana, and winning the game. And so Temple of the False God is a great card. Well, I shouldn't say great. It is a good card in some decks, roughly 10% of decks on EDH Rec. I think this is adequately rated. So there we go. Temple of the False God. What do you guys think in the comments? Let me know. Do you take this into consideration with budget? Do you play it in addition to Ancient Tomb? Are your metagames too slow? Just battle cruisery enough for this? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.